Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry, and today we have my Week 11 power rankings where I'm going to rank all 32 teams based on just my opinion on where I think they land. There's a new team in last place this week, and not as many big movers as previous weeks. Just obviously throughout the season, you kind of learn more about the teams, you have more information, and all the teams start to settle into place. But a couple big movers, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And let's get into that new last place team, the Las Vegas Raiders. Kind of catching a stray here in their bye week, moving back. But the team that was consistently at last place has had some success these past few weeks. So the Vegas Raiders end up moving into last place, not really knowing who their quarterback is. The only bright side is really Brock Bowers and on offense. Max Crosby on defense, and they're all still trying to play for Antonio Pierce. They fire Luke Getsy, lose Devontae Adams. It's a mess of a season. They're at 32, right behind the Tennessee Titans, who have another loss to the Chargers. Who I'm kind of excited, I guess, for the Chargers this year. Chargers have been playing a lot better, and it looks like Jim Harbaugh's been the guy for them, and it's been running the ball too. Not even with Justin Herbert, but the Titans couldn't even really stay in this one, and they continue to lose despite being number one in yards allowed per game, which is a crazy stat that is still true. They have allowed the fewest yards per game of any team in the NFL while allowing the 29th most points. And then, obviously the offense hasn't really been doing much. Still have Will Levis pictured there. I have no idea who the quarterback is, and there's really not like a face of the franchise that you're going to want to put on the graphic anyway at this point. So I got them at 31, just barely ahead of the Raiders, also at 2-7, right behind the New York Giants, who big mover back for me in this one, in a loss to Carolina. This isn't one of those weeks where I've talked about in previous power rankings. If you play against a team and you're close in the power rankings, you're usually going to be deserving of moving behind them. So they move back a lot for me just because in the close games, we've seen that they just lose. They're 2-8. They now have a worse record than the Carolina Panthers, who they lose to in an overtime thriller in Munich, Germany. But although, I had some positivity on the Giants' defense, the offense just can't seem to put it together. Malik Neighbors has seen a much smaller role in the offense. And, while Tyrone Tracy can have a good game, in this one he fumbles and loses the game for the team. So, showing what can happen with a young running back. But yeah, it's been a tough one for the Giants, so they move back. One of the biggest movers of this week, moving back 4 spots to 30 at 2-8, right behind the Browns, another team with a bye. Don't like to move teams if there's a bye, but like I said, the next team, the Carolina Panthers, had to move out of there. So the Browns stay at 29, and stay where they're at in a bye, and the Carolina Panthers move up 4, getting back-to-back wins and a close win over the Saints last week, and then a close win over the Giants this week. No super exciting teams that they beat, but the Saints end up getting a win this week. So I think with the Panthers showing a little bit of promise and winning these close games that they more commonly lose, while their point differential wouldn't suggest that they're the 28th ranked team in the league, I think their play recently, the recency bias allows them to move up and be one of our biggest movers up at 28 at 3-7 this year, behind the Cowboys, who very well could end up towards the bottom of the list. They're still 3-6, but Cooper Rush being out, the only upside is really the guy next to me there, CeeDee Lamb, and even his usage has been, definitely cut off with having Cooper Rush playing, and then even Trey Lance coming in some of these games. But Mike McCarthy is under heavy fire, and Jerry Jones under heavy fire, as they seem to be every year. It seems like Dak's going to be out for the year, and it's really just going to be a mess for the Cowboys. So they move back 4 spots to 27, but I wouldn't rule them out of them making it into the 30 this year. So I got them at 27 at 3-6 behind the New England Patriots, who get a big win over my Chicago Bears. And, they only move up the 1 spot because I just don't think it was a very impressive win. I don't think they played great. They just played better than the Bears. Obviously a 16-point victory. So you'd say, well, that's a pretty big win. But I would say in this one, the Bears beat themselves more than the Patriots beat them. Just in that the play calling was horrible, gets Shane Waldron fired, and a lot of sacks caused by really all matters on the Bears end, whether it be bad offensive line, Caleb holding the ball too long, receivers not getting open. So it was all of those things. And I think that's how the Bears shot themselves in the foot. They still have problems with penalties, one of the first ones in the league. So Patriots won in all those regards, and just were able to dominate the Bears. So they do move up. I didn't think they beat like a great team, with the Bears, on a steady decline at this point. And we'll see them coming up here, but the Patriots move up one spot to 26 at 3-7 behind the 3-7 New Orleans Saints, who I felt like it was only right to move them up. And another win this week, an exciting win at that, over the Atlanta Falcons. I felt like they were able to be a big mover this week because they beat a division rival in a game you would never expect to win. Of course, they get this, first game interim head coach bump that always seems to happen, but it results in a win for the Saints. So again, over the Falcons, who I thought have been a pretty good football team this year, and an important win to stay in it in the division. I think the Saints were deserving of moving up. So they move up 3 spots to 25 at 3-7 behind the Jacksonville Jaguars, who they've been playing close games. They're still 2-8, but I think with how close they've played to some of these opponents, like this week, obviously playing Minnesota, and it being 12-7, and really the Jaguars could have won this game. I think worthy of at least moving up because you played a team like the Minnesota Vikings. So typically don't move up in a loss, but I think the Jaguars have kind of gotten stuck these past couple weeks here playing some better teams, and they played them close, so they move up and look less dysfunctional to me than the previous 7-game losing streak Saints. So they move ahead of them, or stay ahead of them rather, at 24. Still at 2-8 though. You got to win games. This is kind of, you look at how I just talked about the Giants and go, well, how can the Giants at 2-8 be at 30, but then the Jaguars are at 24? And I can understand that. I just think the Jaguars have played against some of these opponents a little bit better, so they're higher for me, but they got to win the game. So I mean, they're currently, if they keep losing, they're going to move down. But for now, they're at 24, right behind the Jets. Another team just kind of keep finding ways to lose games, and really a rough week for the Jets in this particular one against Arizona. Not even really close at all ever. 31-6, I believe, was the final score, and there was just no hope from the beginning of the game. The Cardinals defense completely shut down the Jets offense, and as far as the Cardinals offense, they've looked like a different offense after utilizing James Conner more. And I feel like that offensive line has been playing incredibly well. Kyler Murray knows when to run the ball, and they just tore up this Jets defense, which was previously the biggest bright side of their team, before Robert Saleh was fired. So keep moving back with the play like this, and they move back to 23 at 3-7, right behind the Chicago Bears, who I think are probably even too high right now at 22. I move them back only 2 spots. Clearly the lowest rated 4-win team on the list, but with these 3 back-to-back weeks of just dysfunctional football, you go back to the Hail Mary play against the Commanders. That was a game where, they were losing for the first 50 minutes of the game. They scored 2 touchdowns in towards the end of the game to take the lead, and then they give up the dumbest Hail Mary of all time. So, I think then you get smacked by the Cardinals, you get smacked by the Patriots. I think if and when they lose to the Packers, I think they might even drop back to like the 26 range unless this offense can be revitalized by Thomas Brown in 1 week here and bring out something that hasn't been. We remember at one point, I think I had the Bears as high as like 13, which at the time wasn't even really a bad thought to have because they were 4-2. They had the 4th highest point differential in the league. They had gotten over massive wins over teams like the Jaguars and the Panthers. But Caleb Williams was looking better and the defense was still playing well. And then these 3 back-to-back weeks have just shot them way back. So they keep moving back for me, probably into the lower 25 as well. But for now at 22 at 4-5, moving back 2 spots behind the Indianapolis Colts, who, yes, they lose to the Bills, but I think because they played closer to the Bills for me, not closer than the Bears, but they lost by less points to the Buffalo Bills than the Bears lost. So they had to be ahead of the Bears for me. Couldn't really see them being much higher, and they still did lose the game at the end of the day. So I have them moving up one spot in a loss, but to a good team. Similar situation to the Vikings Jaguars game, where the Jaguars move up because of how well I thought they played in the game, as far as defensively and staying in the game. Kind of opposite for the Colts here, where offensively they stay in the game and against one of the, in my opinion, top teams. So they move up one spot to 4-6 at 21 behind the Dolphins, who are one of our biggest movers up, who just keep winning these close games. You look at, previously in the season, they hadn't really done very much. They hadn't, they had looked completely dysfunctional without Tua Tagovailoa. And then they come in this week and they beat the Rams by 8 and show that their offense can put in work, and their defense was able to contain Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams enough to hold the victory there. The Rams never even getting in the end zone. So I think the Dolphins on their way up. Again, this is kind of one of the few teams where they've stayed at the back of my power rankings, but you could see them moving up to the top, kind of like the Bengals too. The Bengals we'll talk about here shortly, but I think they're another team that you see a lot of promise and you see a lot of potential, but at the end of the day, the Dolphins still 3-6. So they move up 4 spots, big move, but they're going to have to string together a lot of wins, and ultimately they're going to probably have to get into the playoff conversation a little bit more if they're going to end up being in my top 14. So I have them up 4 spots to 20 at 3-6 with some good back-to-back weeks here, and getting a win this week. Right behind the Seattle Seahawks, who have a bye. Again, don't like to move teams if they're on a bye. So in this case, Seahawks get to stay where they're at 19. Behind the Rams, who moved back. Obviously, we just talked about the Dolphins and the Rams. Now, I also said that typically if teams are next to each other or they are close and one team does better, you'd put them ahead. In this case, I don't, just because the Rams, they still have the better record. They have a better chance in their division, and I think the Rams and the Dolphins are very close in as far as ability, and because the Rams have had some better wins and played better altogether despite some injuries, in my opinion, obviously, this year, I think that they still deserve to be ahead of the Dolphins. I also had the Seahawks sitting in the middle, where I didn't want to move I didn't think the Rams deserved to move all the way back to 20, and I didn't think that the Dolphins should have moved up more than 4 spots just because of this one score game over the Dolphins. So the Rams move back 1 spot in their loss over the Dolphins, but still in it in their division, and there's still hope for the team. So they move back to 1 spot to 18 at 4-5, behind who I was just talking about, the Bengals. And this one they lose to to Ravens, but again, this is another one where I think the Ravens are one of the best teams in the league right now, and the Bengals kept it within 1, so they move up 1 spot in a loss. But I think you can really look at the Bengals and say they're starting to look more impressive, and it just seems like every year it's going to take them a little bit longer to get started out, and that's just how it works for them. So with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, still putting everything together, the emergence of Chase Brown, I think, has been a nice little bit of a shining star in the backfield after losing Joe Mixon. I think you see how Joe Mixon is performing this year. Probably wish you had him back, but at least know you have Chase Brown. And then Trey Hendrickson really only being the only bright point on the defense, with having that one game with like 4 sacks, 4 tackles for a loss. And he's definitely a threat, but unfortunately the rest of the defense isn't. And they have the most losses of 33. I think most losses in history when they've scored 33 points in a game. I want to say they're like 2-6 this year or something when that happens. So tough loss for the Bengals. But they move up in my power rankings to 17. Right behind the Broncos, who get a loss this week to the Kansas City Chiefs on a kind of like, this is why it's almost like they shouldn't even move back, just because they really should have won that game. Just some other teams that I think have been better in past weeks. Broncos still growing, and still a lot of opportunity for them. But they're 5-5. They're even. They're mid. They're 16. I think it makes sense, and I feel like they are deserving to be where they're at. And when you have a shitty loss like that, where you probably should have at least um, beat the Chiefs there. I mean, you have the easiest field goal of all time, and you have one guy that doesn't block properly, and then it turns into, the field goal's blocked, game's over, and they lose the game. If they're winning against the Chiefs, I'm probably moving them up like 4 or 5 spots. But in this case, they lose, and they just move back to 1 spot for me to 16 at 5-5 with a lot of upside still. Again, every week I talk about one of the better defenses in the league, and Bo Nix starting to put things together on offense. The emergence of Audric Estime, I don't think he had a great week to start off, but it seems like he's going to be the lead back, and he's who they're going to be going to. So we'll see if that can bring them some promise in the future. But for now, they're at 16, behind the Falcons, who moved back in that bad loss to the Saints. Obviously not like a bad point margin, but just a Saints team that needed a get-right game, and it wasn't looking like it was going to be against the Falcons with how well they had performed this year. And it ends up being the time for the get-right game for them. So with losing to, at the time, one of the seemingly the worst teams in the league, you got to move back, and they move back 3 spots for me. Don't typically like to overreact to just 1 week, but this one, how important it was being a division game, now, Saints technically will still have a chance in the division. So, yeah, I think Falcons kind of shot themselves in the foot this week, and they move back to 15, 3 spots at 6-4 behind the Arizona Cardinals, who, you see them beat the Bears and you go, well, that's not really that impressive. The Bears have really stunk. They've really had a lot of problems altogether. Originally it was just the offense. Offense starts to look better. Defense gets bad. And then the Cardinals smack the Jets like this, which you could also say, well, the Jets haven't looked good. The Jets at least, have, like, they did nothing. The Jets did nothing in this game, offensively, defensively. It was just kind of a steamroll for the Cardinals. They move up 2 spots, but again, the Jets haven't been that good. They've been ranked right around the Bears for me. So when you're in these like lower to mid 20s in my rankings and you get a big win, not as impressive as over a big team. That's not the Cardinals' fault. They still move up for me to 14th at 6-4 behind the Los Angeles Chargers, who I talked about earlier being kind of one of my like favorite teams to see this year, because you've got a guy like Justin Herbert going into the game who threw 5,000 yards once, who's throwing 14 for 18, 140 yards and winning the game because they ran the ball well. And they just keep doing that. Their defense, as you can see, one of the best in the league. And I think it's just kind of a sentiment of what Jim Harbaugh can do. Now, for this to work out, because the Chargers have been like, fringe playoff teams every year since Justin Herbert's been there. Now what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to win a playoff game or two for, their success. And that's probably where the bar is, especially when you get a guy like Jim Harbaugh. But it looks like a team that can do it. So they move up 1 spot for me to 13 at 6-3. Not a very impressive win over the Titans. That's why you only move up the 1 spot. But they still move up. But they're behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose a game, but they play very close against the 49ers as a very injured team. You've got Baker Mayfield doesn't have any wide receivers to throw the ball to, so he resorts to throwing it to Cade Otton and Rachaad White basically all the time. And for them to be as close as they were in the game against a team like the 49ers, who are fairly healthy now, and the way they stopped Christian McCaffrey in this game, I thought was very impressive, especially with how poorly their defense had performed. Held Christian McCaffrey to 3 yards a carry and only 39 yards in the game. So I thought it was pretty impressive on the ground. Obviously, did get some receiving opportunities too, but I thought the defense played impressive, and the offense, as injured as they are, was able to keep the game close. So they do move up for me. I just couldn't, we'll go back to the Chargers. I thought that was a pretty good win over the Titans. It was like a 10-point victory, but for the Buccaneers to only lose by 3 to the 49ers, I just thought that was more impressive. And even though it's a loss, I've kept the Buccaneers up there. but with their record dwindling, they're still losing the games. You know, they play close against the Chiefs. They played close against the 49ers, and I think if they had the performances they had in that game and they just played not, you know, top 10 teams, I think there's a chance they're 6-4 now, and they're definitely at this, fringe top 10 spot. So they move up one spot in a loss to 12 at 4-6, right behind the Green Bay Packers, who Green Bay Packers have not looked great, but they do have a bye this week. So in a bye, again, I don't like to move teams very much, but there were some teams that needed to move up. We'll talk about them in just a minute here. So the Green Bay Packers have to move back a spot in a bye week with an opportunity to play the Bears. This is a Packers team that I also had kind of had a little bit too high in previous weeks. In my opinion, I had them, I think, as high as like 7 or 8. And I don't know if that's really been fair. They have a bye week. They get to play the Bears in Chicago, and I'm not looking forward to it. So they move back just the one spot to 11, right behind the Houston Texans, who also moved back a spot. Just haven't looked good. I mean, obviously they play a close game against the Detroit Lions, but it's been the whole season where they've played down to their opponents, and it seems like it's honestly kind of like the Chiefs, where like the Chiefs have a really good record and they've been a really good football team, but they've always been in these close games and it's unnecessary. They need to play better football. And in this case, they lose the game because they're in this close game. They let the Lions get down the field and get a game-winning field goal. So Texans, for me, especially to go on a playoff run, you need to you need to be able to win the close games, and they have for the most part. But you can't be in as many close games, and you need to know. At least for me, I'd like to see you dominate a bad team, just so we know that they're not, playing to the level of their opponent, which seems like has happened to me. And they move back one spot in a loss to, again, it's another one of the best teams in the league. So I can't shame them too much, especially because it was on a game-winning field goal. Texans had an opportunity to beat, the seemingly best team in the league, the Detroit Lions. So Texans stay in the top 10, but they move back a spot at 6-4 to me. Also, just noticed -2 point differential for the 6-4 Texans. Reminds me of a year when the Jaguars, I think it was either last year or the year before, had a positive point differential, and they were like 3-6 or something. And then the Vikings were the exact opposite, where they had a negative point differential, but they were like 7-3 or something along those lines. But just crazy to see. Anyway, back to the Washington Commanders being the next team. They get the loss this week to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Washington Commanders haven't beat a team with a winning record yet. So this is just kind of the oh, and I forgot to they moved 3 spots, forgot to put the arrow in the corner. Shame on me. But yeah, the Commanders, they moved back 3 spots in a loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It kind of moves, like when I saw that, because I thought, oh, the Commanders have been really good this year. And it was really just because I think they beat the Bears team that was on their high horse, and they had this big win. But if you look at the teams they beat, it really hasn't been impressive. So yes, it is cool with how well, Jaden Daniels is seemingly doing, but Jaden Daniels doesn't do very well against some of these tougher opponents. And, he's still very good for a rookie, no doubt about it. But I think, not to say that he's overrated, I just think the consistently getting these player of the weeks and in games where he probably isn't deserving of it, I think he's kind of getting a little bit too overhyped right now, because although I think this Commanders team is very exciting, and I have them in my top 10, so I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying they might be a little overrated because they still haven't beat a team with a winning record yet. So Commanders move back 3 spots to 7-3 with a +73 point differential, right behind the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is what I talked about earlier. When you get a win against a team and they're very close in the rankings, they move ahead. Steelers move up for me in another week where you look at the teams that they've played, and especially in these last 3 weeks, their offense has just been phenomenal, and their defense has been great all year. So Russell Wilson really helping this team move up in my power rankings here, and in probably everybody else's too, with how well they've played. That's the offense has looked in a while for the Steelers. And, you look at when Justin Fields was in there and it was questionable to pull him out at 4-2. We also look as like the Steelers were able to stay, Mike Tomlin famously known for having a positive record all of his career. You could say, well, Justin Fields was doing good. He was 4-2, but Kenny Pickett had a positive record while he was on the team. And then you look at Duck Hodges had to come in for some games, and they've had, after Big Ben, there really hasn't been like a cemented quarterback one that is playing at a high level, and they've still managed to keep a positive record. So I think Russell Wilson's really brought the team to the next level, and they move up 3 spots for me to 8 at 7-2 behind the 49ers, who they do move up a spot really just because I didn't think the Steelers were worthy of moving up 4 spots yet. It would honestly, looking back on it, I think the Steelers definitely should be ahead of the 49ers, but I do have them move up because I don't know. I kind of get lost in the 49ers roster and go, there is just too much talent everywhere for this team to not be in the top 10 and, be where they're at. So at 5-4, definitely the highest rated 5-4 team in the league. But I have them at 7, moving up a spot. Definitely going to have to keep an eye out. This might be a Packers situation, right? The Packers ranked a little bit too high because I thought it was impressive that they were still winning with Malik Willis. Well, now we see that Jordan Love really is turning the ball over, and it's maybe I'm crazy, but maybe there isn't as big of a space between Jordan Love and Malik Willis as we thought. But we're not talking about the Packers. We're talking about the 49ers and me having them at 5-4, which again, I will admit could be a little too high. But they get a win. They move up. That's how it goes. Suck me. Next, we have the Minnesota Vikings at 6. They move back a spot in a win over the Jaguars. Again, I think they kind of played down to their opponent. You have Sam Darnold throwing 2 red zone interceptions, only has 3 on the year. I say only when that also leads the league. He has the most red zone interceptions now in the league at 3, 2 of them coming in this game. Also threw a 3rd interception right out of half. And Sam Darnold is Sam Darnolding. So I think got to take that into account. And Vikings, they get a win, but probably a loss for the organization there with how poorly they played. Going to have to start, they're going to have to do something to turn this around because it is going to start to result in losses soon if they don't. So I have them at 6, right behind the Philadelphia Eagles. Big move here on the Eagles that just absolutely kill the Cowboys. What's crazy is it was like when I was making these power rankings videos and I was talking about, I don't even know if the Eagles will be able to make it into my top 10 with how they've been playing, because they had really looked rough on offense all around, and as well as on defense. They seem to have regressed in both departments other than like Saquon Barkley. Like obviously Saquon Barkley was always a positive for the team, but as far as everywhere else across the board, I thought that they looked like they had regressed as a team. And they were winning games, but they were still close. They were losing games they shouldn't. And now they've really turned into that team where they can just absolutely destroy other teams. And that's what they did in this one. And I had asked, I said, the Eagles are going to have to blow out. They're going to have to blow out bad teams, and they're going to have to win some close games against good teams. And that's what they've done. So they move up all the way to number 5 in a murder against the Cowboys, and moving them up to number 5 at 7-2 with a plus 72 point differential. Another team in that case, which is weird. I just noticed that there's 2 teams now that I've seen that their point differential matches their record, which is interesting. Next, we have the Bills, and honestly, not a lot of movement. So if you watched my video last week, you'd probably click off because the Bills stay where they're at. They get the win over the Colts. Not a super impressive win. Yes, they win by 10, but I think the game was a little too close for me against a Colts team that had kind of fallen off and Joe Flacco's play had gone down. So they stay at 4. Baltimore Ravens get a close win over the Bengals, who again, Bengals put up a lot of points. The Ravens put up more. They kind of get screwed. The Bengals, I didn't even really talk about it, and I should have, kind of get screwed on the 2-point conversion where multiple penalties that weren't called and they should have been. That gives the Bengals a chance to lose a game, and Baltimore's probably moving back in my power rankings. Bengals are probably moving up more, but Baltimore Ravens, they stay where they're at. It's just kind of almost like a little pass getting them through. I don't think that their win was any less impressive than the Bills over the Colts. so they stay at 3. The Kansas City Chiefs is another team where it's like, well, their win wasn't very impressive, but it was a win, so I'm gonna keep them where they're at. They haven't really had any of these blowout victories, and so I still think that they need to do that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because they're winning all their close games, so they stay at 2, and the Detroit Lions stay at 1. Again, this is another close game over the Texans, who are probably, of all the opponents that I just talked about in these last 4, the best team. But unfortunately, I felt like this game shouldn't have come down to a game-winning field goal. I think that the Lions are on a different level than the Texans, and it would almost went into overtime. So the Lions stay at number 1, and then we look at the big picture here, where I believe I did actually put that because there was a team that I put that didn't move 3. Yeah, the Commanders. They do move 3 in this graphic. But yeah, let me know what you think down below of my power rankings. Is there any team that I'm too high on or too low on? I like looking at this big picture at the end, and because I can see clearly now, it's like, well, 49ers should probably be behind the Steelers, especially with how well they played. I don't know if I could put the 49ers behind the Commanders, especially with this loss and the Commanders not beating a team with a winning record. And I think the Texans, I've kind of talked pretty negatively about how close the games have been, but I also don't think that they're much worse than the Packers or the Buccaneers or anything. I guess the Buccaneers are the other team, kind of the like, how is a 4-6 team at 12? And again, I kind of explained that because of they played within, a couple points of the Chiefs and the 49ers. So I thought that was very impressive and not enough to move them out, because their record overall doesn't exactly show how well they've played in the games. But I think if the Buccaneers lose another one or have a close game against a bad team, you could see them going as far back as like behind the Falcons, probably back to the 16-17 range. I think the Bengals could move up, but they need to learn how to win games. But otherwise, I think we're pretty accurate here. So let me know what you think down below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.